Welcome to Jokes Room, your daily dose of laughter.
It was meant to be a simple visit, the kind you schedule between other errands because it feels too small to deserve its own day. I had booked an appointment at a nearby clinic for a routine checkup. Nothing urgent, nothing dramatic, just something that had been sitting on my list for a while. The confirmation message said 10 in the morning, and I remember thinking that I would be done before noon and still have time to stop for groceries on the way home. I arrived a little early, parked easily, and walked in with that calm confidence people have when they believe they understand what is about to happen. The clinic smelled faintly of disinfectant and something floral that was trying very hard to soften it, and the waiting area was quiet, except for a low television mounted in the corner showing a morning program with the volume turned almost all the way down. I walked up to the front desk, smiled, and said I was there for my appointment. The person behind the desk looked up, returned the smile, and asked for my name. I gave it, watched her type carefully, and felt reassured by the steady rhythm of her keyboard. She nodded, said everything was in the system, and slid a clipboard toward me with a few forms attached. I was told to fill them out and have a seat. That felt normal, so I took the clipboard, found an empty chair, and began reading. The first page asked for basic information I had already provided online, but I filled it in again anyway, carefully and neatly, because it felt like the kind of place where neatness mattered. The second page asked about symptoms, and I paused, pen hovering, because I didn't really have any. I wrote routine checkup in the space provided and moved on. The third page asked for an emergency contact, and I spent a full minute deciding whether to write the number with dashes or spaces before realizing that it probably didn't matter. When I finished, I returned the clipboard to the desk. The receptionist glanced at it, nodded approvingly, and said I could take a seat. I sat down again, relaxed, and looked around. A few other people were waiting, each absorbed in their own quiet activity, flipping pages of magazines that all seemed to be at least a year old. After a few minutes, my name was called, and I stood up quickly, feeling slightly proud of myself for being attentive. A nurse appeared at the doorway and gestured for me to follow her. She led me down a hallway that looked exactly like every clinic hallway I had ever seen, with closed doors on both sides and framed posters reminding people to wash their hands. We stopped at a scale just outside one of the rooms, and she asked me to step on. I did. She wrote the number down and then asked me to step off. She took my height, wrote that down too, and then asked me to follow her into the room. Inside, she gestured toward the examination table and asked me to sit. She wrapped a cuff around my arm, took my blood pressure, and nodded thoughtfully at the numbers. Everything about her movements suggested that she had done this thousands of times before, and that familiarity was comforting. Then she asked me to wait because the doctor would be with me shortly. I sat there, feet dangling slightly off the edge of the table, listening to the faint sounds of activity in the hallway. After a few minutes, there was a knock, and the doctor came in. He greeted me warmly, sat down on the stool, and glanced at the computer screen. He asked how I was feeling, and I said I felt fine. He asked if I had any concerns, and I said no, not really. He nodded, clicked a few things on the screen, and said we would just go through a few standard checks. That sounded good. He listened to my heart, checked my reflexes, and asked a few routine questions. Everything moved along smoothly until he paused and looked back at the screen with a slight frown. He scrolled, leaned closer, and then asked if I had completed all the forms. I said yes, I was pretty sure I had. He nodded and said sometimes the system just needed a refresh. He stepped out of the room, presumably to fix whatever needed fixing, and I sat there waiting. A few minutes later, the nurse returned, holding another clipboard. She said there was just one additional form that needed to be completed. I took the clipboard and looked at it. It was a single page asking for confirmation of information I had already written twice. I filled it out again, returned it, and she thanked me and said the doctor would be back shortly. I waited. When the doctor returned, he smiled apologetically and said thank you for my patience. He looked at the screen again, nodded, and said everything looked good. Then he asked me to confirm my date of birth. I told him, and he typed it in.
He then asked me to confirm it again, just to be sure. I told him again, slower this time, and he typed some more. He leaned back and said that sometimes the system liked to be extra careful. He asked if I had any questions, and I said no. He nodded and said I could get dressed and stop by the front desk on my way out. I got off the table, put my shoes back on, and walked out feeling like things were finally wrapping up. At the front desk, I handed over the small slip the doctor had given me. The receptionist looked at it, typed something, and then paused. She looked at the screen, then back at me, and asked if I had already checked in. I said yes, I had checked in when I arrived. She nodded and said this was just a secondary check-in. She asked me to confirm my name again. I did. She asked me to confirm my appointment time. I did. She asked me to confirm the doctor I had seen. I did. She smiled, typed some more, and then asked me to take a seat for just a moment. I sat down again, this time less confident about how close I was to leaving. After a short wait, my name was called again, and I stood up, only to be directed to a different counter.
There, another staff member asked me to verify my insurance information. I handed over my card, watched it get scanned, and waited. She asked me if anything had changed since my last visit. I said no. She asked me to confirm that nothing had changed. I confirmed it. She nodded and said everything looked fine, but she needed one more signature. She pointed to a small electronic pad and asked me to sign. I signed, handed it back, and smiled politely. She smiled back and said I was all set. I turned to leave, but before I reached the door, the receptionist called my name again. I turned around, expecting perhaps one last question. She said they just needed to check my weight one more time because the system hadn't saved it properly earlier. I glanced down the hallway, then back at her and said, okay. I followed another nurse to the scale, stepped on, stepped off, and watched her write the number down again. She said thank you and told me I could head back to the front desk. At the desk, the receptionist typed quickly, nodded, and said everything was complete. She smiled and wished me a good day. I stepped outside, took a deep breath of fresh air, and checked the time. It was almost noon. I stood there for a moment, holding my car keys, and then walked toward the parking lot, already rehearsing how I would explain to myself why a simple, routine checkup had taken the better part of a morning.